the sole survivor of that crime. He was trained to infiltrate violent groups. Now, this was back in the 60s, mind you. Remember, we think we have the busy political time we're living in, how indeed we are, but it was not. It is nothing compared to what it was in the 60s, particularly on the campus. For those of you who are old enough to remember this, we had some very violent groups called the Students for Democratic Society, SDS, the Weather Underground. These were violent groups that everyone knew who the students were, but what was at issue was who was funding these groups and who was organizing them and who was teaching these kids how to be terrorists. And they were, in fact, agent provocateurs from other countries, principally Russia and Cuba. Mr. Goldberg it tells me, has 163 credit hours and no degree. How did that happen? Because he was inserted and infiltrated as an undercover spy in 23 different universities throughout the time that he was in their employ. When it was done, he went through what I guess he will describe to you this evening as a mind wipe, a chemically induced mind wipe by the federal government, and caused him to basically block all of those memories out of his conscious mind. It wasn't until he was in a very, very tough car accident when parts of it started coming back to him in I guess in different times and in different ways. Anyway, I guess eventually it all came back to him, and he tells me that he actually wrote this book as a therapy. He did it in a manner that the book itself has a lot of fictionalized characters in it, but the story is absolutely true. You don't need to hear anything more from me. Harvey Gomberg is our speaker.
Well, that was everything I was going to say. Where to go from here? The decade of the 1960s was a very troubled time in the history of this country. The president was assassinated, Martin Luther King was assassinated, the president's brother was assassinated. There were riots on college campuses throughout the country and in major cities like Los Angeles, Detroit, and Baltimore. There was a group of technicians at one of the intelligence agencies whose job was to pour through thousands and thousands of photographs of people that were at these demonstrations that turned violent, as well as just regular demonstrations. They came to a conclusion that at the demonstrations that turned violent, there were 5 people, 5 images that showed up in each and every one of them and did not show up at all in the marching peaceful demonstrations. At the violent demonstrations, there was arson, they had a kidnapping. Almost every one consisted of having a murder, either on campus or in the cities. We were dealing with something very violent, and we had no idea what it was. When those pictures were found, the bureaucrats in this particular intelligence agency, I know you from somewhere. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Were you there? The intelligence officers decided that we had to attack the problem, find out who these people were. All we knew was that they were highly financed, very mobile, and in some of the photographs, some of the images, they appeared with advanced weaponry. How did they get it? Where's the money coming from? Who's doing all this? Initially, they tried different ways of finding out who these people were. They used their own experienced intelligence agents, and they met with abject failure. Every one of them came back in the equivalent of a body bag. they decided they had to change the tactics because it wasn't working. What they ended up doing was came up with an idea to recruit teenagers, early children out of high school. They would look the part, they would have the knowledge of a person just entering into college, and they would pass. So what they did was they used their profilers to create the profile of the prototype agent. And they hired an army of people to go through and scour the records of thousands of high schools throughout the country, looking specifically for someone that would qualify on all the points of that profile. They came up with about 200 people that would qualify just based on the points of the profile. They interviewed them under surreptitious circumstances, and some of them just immediately dropped out and said, whatever you're telling me, I don't want any part of that, or I'm married, or I have other plans. They got it down to 50, and from those 50, as was explained, they selected 12 people. 2 of them disappeared during training, and the other 10 of us were separated, We're separated 5 on college campuses and 5 in street gangs. The purpose of our activity at that time was to be on the right campus or the right location in a city when these people struck and did their magic, got people all involved, screaming, shouting, breaking windows, and that murder that always occurred there. We wanted to have somebody at that location so that they could themselves be recruited into that organization and find out from the inside what it was all about. Hi, Chuck. Lost my train of thought there. This is one of those embarrassing moments.
How did you get recruited? How did you get recruited?
By people. Actually, he mentioned that of the 10 that went into the field, only 1 survived, and I was it. My career started the day I graduated. I graduated from Western High School. I sat with the band section on lawn chairs on the grass, played my clarinet for the processional. When that was finished and the speakers started their speeches, I disengaged my clarinet, put it in its case, and handed it to a friend of mine to hold until I got my diploma. Then got up, straightened up my gown, put on my hat, and walked over to the line to receive my diploma. That evening, my parents had a dinner party, a congratulations party. I didn't know at that time that that would be the last time that my twin brother and sister and myself and my parents would ever sit down and have dinner together. That was it. 2 weeks later, I was on an agency aircraft with someone who was introduced to me as John. He became my handler or controller, and we landed in Florida, slept in a motel that night, and the next morning went to the parking lot, got on a bus with 11 other teenagers with their handlers. We drove, and just outside of Williamsburg, Virginia, the bus pulled over, and we were given these black hoods to put over our heads. So we did that, drove some more, parked, we were led out of the bus into a building. I later found out that we were taken to the most secure and largest military installation in the United States, a place called Camp Perry. Some of you people may recognize that name. Once inside, my summer vacation out of high school consisted of about 3 hours a day learning a brand new martial art form and the physical conditioning that went into being able to use it. The rest of the day was spent going to different classes, and I learned something they called spycraft. This was done day in and day out for the rest of the summer. About a week before the end of summer, I was back in Orange County and went to Fullerton Junior College. There for a while, I was transferred over to Long Beach City College, where I had 2 classes that I thoroughly enjoyed. One was in zoology and the other was in microbiology. At some point, I was given instructions to get myself thrown out of the class of microbiology, which meant the school. The teacher said something, I started laughing, good humor, and she pointed out to the class that this is a science class and it's not a laughing class. What are you laughing about? I stood up, repeated my thoughts. The gentlemen in the class started laughing. Some of the women giggled. Others just had shocked looks on their faces. And Miss Thomas said, "Get out of here." Mission accomplished. I finally was able to graduate, and we flew into Texas, and I went to Texas A&M. Junior college, City College, to Texas A&M. That was a jump. I eventually went to 23 different schools. The reason for that was the bad guys weren't sending out invitations as to where they would strike next. So I had to move from, we had scientists, mathematicians who were trying to figure out the probability of where they would be next, okay? And so the 5 of us kept rotating between schools, hoping to land in the right place at the right time. In school 22, we got word that the technicians reviewing all those photographs were continually reviewing even new photographs and things that were occurring while I was going to school. And they found something else that they could correlate to. They found out in those situations where those 5 people occurred, in all of them, 6 other people showed up within the crowds themselves. One of them attracted the attention. He was in the back, and every time he showed up, he was wearing the equivalent of a light disguise. And they tried to figure out why that was, and someone came up with a solution that he probably went to that school, and he probably went to that school, and it was another me. He was showing up at the different schools, but he was showing up there for the riots. He had something to do with it. They tracked him down, and he got his name. They found out that from my school 23, that he was going to, from my 22nd school, he was going to be at the University of California at Berkeley in a particular class. John enrolled me in that class. We got there towards the end of summer. I spent that summer hanging out with a bunch of rebels, radicals, bad people, yelling and screaming, down with the United States, down burn Washington for peace in Vietnam. It's kind of weird when you think about it. Kill the president, burn down Washington for peace. So that's what we did. The day school came about, first day. Walked into the class, first thing I recognized was my target sitting there. And second thing I recognized at the head of the room was a board similar to that. It was like a double-sized board, a little bit higher than that blackboard, full of mathematical nonsense. As I looked at that and saw the squiggly lines and the Greek letters and math that was so totally beyond me, I started to recognize that at Western I had Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, Trigonometry, and some of my friends actually had Calculus 1 in the second year of Calculus. This stuff was light years beyond any of that, and I knew that much even though I didn't understand a word of it. And I wondered, why did John put me in this situation without any kind of background? Sat down, the teacher came forward and announced that it's good to have the 9 of you accept our invitation. I will be your instructor, and what you will learn in this class is the meaning of that equation, and the way that equation will not only save the United States, but it would work towards the peace and prosperity of the entire world. And you guys will be part of it. And for those of you who get to a point where you're going to graduate, you will become part of making comments on the formula. Until then, I have one rule in this class. There will be no questions, because you guys really aren't smart enough to ask a question. You don't understand the level of math involved in that. So he had a technique, insult everybody in the class, I guess. He also pointed out that the reason you guys were so selected is you all have degrees in mathematics and or physics. So you have the ability to learn this, and I will teach you. Then he went on with his lecture. After class, I contacted my control, my handler, John, and I told him everything that I told you folks, and I said, but we have a problem. And the problem is no questions. Prior to this, at the other schools, the company developed a procedure for asking particular questions that were relevant to the class, but for someone in the class that had an alternative things on their mind, the questions were designed to trigger a response in those people with the realization that I was asking that, sounds complicated, that I was asking that question, and if it triggered that response, I would be someone that they wanted to talk to. Because I was like them, because that question meant that I was one of them. We lost that weapon, we couldn't use that weapon in the classroom. I was in jail with them, and towards the end of our stay in there, I realized that this was just the Goon Squad, and their leader was somebody named Billy. Use your imagination. And I was in conversation with the leader of that group, and he said, and Billy is going to do a big event on basement floor of the library building. He was going to do this big event. He put his wife in control of building a bomb that was to blow up in New York at the USO because Marines were coming back. They were meeting their wives and their kids. It would be an event for 200-300 people. And I got that information to John, and later on he told me that he wasn't in time to capture those people involved in it. He said that they made a mistake and they blew themselves up. And so Billy's wife got blown up, so he immediately went to someone else. I know, but he found somebody else and married her.
Yeah. It's interesting because we have a lot of family members who are involved. My current husband's father was FBI, and he actually did covert operations for German. And we had another family member in the CIA, but if he would have been dead after he had been captured. There were things that they told us before he died, I told the top. You know, but I saw and witnessed what he showed me.
I think the part I was involved in, all they wanted was the information, they would kill you.
Yeah.
There'd be no other questions, there'd be nobody there to disavow you because you wouldn't exist any longer.
You personally had to have a very strong character within your own self, because I know that a lot of people involved with those organizations, some of them became almost indoctrinated in themselves in those false, you have to have a really strong character within yourself. It's very centered to be able to not only survive, but do what you did, and the length and everything else, and that alone, I mean, I commend you as a human being, you know what I'm saying, because I've seen what those things on the other side can do.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the things that John taught me was that the biggest mistake that I could make was believing the role I was playing. He said in other operations we lost people because they couldn't separate who they really were from what their assignment was. Yeah, you're right.
No, so I mean, you were here for a purpose.
Pardon me, the young lady back there with her hand up.
Were you restricted in any way? I mean, when you got out, I mean, how much were you able to tell anybody? I mean, and is the only reason now that you wrote the book and is because time has passed and there's like freedom of information?
No, actually, I did sign an agreement. I signed a stipulation not to, and I haven't revealed anything secret or anything. And I didn't talk to anybody at the time because I couldn't talk to anybody. I was ashamed of what I had done. I was involved, and I left there. It was at a time where people were spitting at people coming back from Vietnam for serving, and I didn't want to be part of that. And what do you tell somebody? Hi, I'm a spy, how you doing? Besides that, I just didn't have any skills. I had nothing. And so.
You said when you got done, you didn't have any skills, you didn't have any training for anything.
I know, I still
What did you do?
Well, I did have skills. I could walk into a room, I could identify everybody.
How did you make a living?
I don't know if I could be a pickpocket. really could. I took their offer to go back into service in the non-lethal part and actually have a job which I could be trained at and I could learn. And then, you know, everything after that was a learning experience for me. I won't tell you about my first date because it was with a nurse that I was in the hospital recovering from my injuries for most of a year. And this gal was really nice. She took care of me, and I realized because she's a nurse and I'm a patient. But I thought there was a connection there. So anyway, when I got out, I thought, I'm gonna ask her for a date, whatever that is. And I called her up and set up a time, and she said, where would you like to go? I said, I really don't know. And I didn't know where the restaurants were. I didn't know the protocol for a restaurant was. So I told her to pick the place that she would like to go. So she picked this place in Los Angeles, ground floor, big building on top of it, nice window space, leather chairs. And fortunately, it was at 4 o'clock because I didn't like crowds. I always avoided crowds, not quite like this, but in a really compact area with no way out. And she knew the maître d', and she mentioned a name, and he said, okay, I can seat you over here at this select seating place over here, but you have to promise to finish your meal in an hour and a half, because that's when the reservation is. And I figured there's not a moment in time I couldn't eat something in an hour and a half. You know, if he said get out of here in 15 minutes, I'd have to work at it. An hour and a half is a good length of time. We started walking over there. I thought better of it. And I turned to him and I said, is that door over there, does that lead to the kitchen? He said, yeah. I asked him, is there another door on the other side of that goes out maybe to a back area, an alley, or some area away from the village? He said, yeah, that's true. I said, okay, we'd like to have that table over there. So she looks at me, he looks at me, and we walk over to the table, we sit down, and after an awkward bit of silence, she asked me, she said, why did you not want to sit in that seat over that place? So that's where everyone comes here to sit. And I said, and matter of factly, I told her, I said, well, look, we're sitting over there, I noticed the glass isn't bulletproof, and so you come by and just start shooting through the glass window, and everybody in the front row would be killed. Other than that, someone could throw a brick through the window, followed by a firebomb, and there'd be a big fire in here before anyone could stop to think about it. Sitting back here, we have the entire room in front of us. We can see what's happening as it unfolds. We can go out the kitchen door, out to the back, and get away to your car, because I wasn't driving at that time. And that was totally inappropriate, and I had no idea that that was inappropriate, because that's what I was taught, and that's what I had learned, and different things like that, so.
Did you have any?
What was that? Oh, no, she ate her dinner.
I think we have time for one more question.
Did they tell you when you lost other people that were part of your group? Were you aware that?
Not at all.
None of that?
No, I only found out during the debriefing when I asked to meet them and talk to them.
No, you were sure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Well, this has been really